Welcome everybody, my name's James Lappin. This is an IM Tech Group event. My thanks to Maria, the IM Tech Group Chair, for organising this event and setting it up. All I'd like to do is say something to introduce AI, because we hope this is going to be the first of several talks about AI. Something about the specific topic in question, and something about our excellent speakers who you can see, Vivek and Per, and then I'll hand over to Vivek and Per for the talk. So AI covers a multitude of different tools of different types of complexity. You can have something as simple as a pre-programmed set of rules that might identify duplicates over a collection, to something as sophisticated as a machine learning tool to auto-classify content across a vast system, right? And anything in between that. And we can predict that we as records managers will be making more and more use of artificial intelligence over time for more and more different purposes. We can also predict that we will be using it at all stages of the records management, the record life cycle. We'll be using it on live systems, we'll be using it on legacy systems, and for those of you that have to transfer material to National Archives, you'll be using it at the point at which you select and sensitivity review that material, right? But you might not be doing all of that at once straight away, yeah? And one of the hypotheses I'd like to make is that we as records managers will probably be using AI more on legacy systems than we will on live systems to start with. And that's partly because the information security concerns about AI on live systems are so intense, right? So, and my second hypothesis is that the best way to understand artificial intelligence and its uses in records management is to look at it in the context of a specific records management problem. So I'm delighted to say that Vivek and Per today have chosen a specific records management problem. And it is to do with legacy systems. It's to do with all of the content that you might have in a file share, shared drive that your organization might have used for years and years, and then you've moved to the cloud. And you have these multiple sets of decisions to make on what to do with all that stuff on that shared drive. And Vivek and Per are going to talk you through those decisions and talk you through how AI might help you with those choices. Yeah. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Vivek and Per themselves. They're both extremely experienced information governance and information compliance professionals. They both work for Infotechtion. Vivek leads the Microsoft Azure and M365 managed data services at Infotechtion. And Per has been working on SharePoint since, I believe, 2001. So you're a real old SharePoint hand. So Vivek, Per, nothing more from me. Floor is yours.
Thank you, James, and thank you everyone for joining the session. I'll be doing most of the talking in this session. It's more of a discussion from our side, and looking to actually good participation from yourselves in the form of questions. As we go through the slides and various topics, please keep those questions coming as we usually do. We'll try our best to answer those questions. Per, my colleague who's on the call, we'll try and keep an eye on those questions as well as we go along. And Per, feel free to, or James, feel free to stop me if there are any important questions, if there are questions which are sort of relevant to the topic that I'm talking about. We're happy to take those questions and respond to those straight away during the session. So we have 90 minutes together today. I'm going to spend first 4 minutes, just an introduction to Infotechtion. It's a very brief one. Most of you know me. I've been on this roundtable for a while now. But for those who are new, we are a management consulting company, provide consulting services and managed services. Very focused specialization on information protection and governance in the Microsoft world, in the Microsoft cloud, which is Microsoft 365, including all the wonderful things that you get in Microsoft 365 and also the Azure platform. Our services are divided into three key categories. The first one being information protection and governance strategies, so helping customers who are starting out on the journey for cloud, Microsoft Cloud, or already on Microsoft Cloud, but looking to build a governance strategy or an information protection strategy in Microsoft Cloud. We work with those customers to develop that strategy, establish critical success factors, and build an implementation roadmap. That top half is something that I'm going to refer back later on as well. Something to keep in mind that now this strategy piece of work is actually for qualified customers, is also funded by Microsoft. So it's also a good opportunity for customers to get this strategy built if you already have certain Microsoft 365 presence and usage. Then Microsoft is happy to fund those strategy activities. And linked to that is also that strategy is then supported by where we tend to focus a lot is the architecture to build that blueprint or a design which factors in the core principles of classifying your information, structuring your information, and securing that information, whether it is through permissions management or some of the advanced capabilities like confidentiality classification or sensitivity classification capabilities. And so finally, as most consulting companies, we do have some solutions which are sort of more accelerators to help along the implementation journey, and also, if required, during the business as usual or operational to kind of maintain or embed and sustain those capabilities or the governance capabilities that you implement. Just very quickly, the overall engagement approach Infotechtion follows is starting with assessing an information maturity. And as I referenced it previously, this can now be funded by Microsoft, and specific Microsoft content-led workshop helps us do a qualitative and quantitative assessment of your information to develop a current score, a current maturity, and based on that establish what are your information governance goals. What is it that you want to implement? Where are the priorities? What are the key use cases? Of course, in this forum, we talk a lot about records management, but records management is one aspect of information compliance. Engagements tend to also be about protecting your information. How do you prevent data loss? What about subject right requests? How do we manage privacy information, etc.? And that information maturity assessment helps us build a core architecture through which we can retain and protect information. So as part of that includes supporting the development of retention classifications. And these could be either review of your existing retention classifications or building a brand new retention classification if you don't have one, and also support you in implementation of those retention classifications, leveraging your existing licenses. And I know in this forum that Microsoft licensing has been a big topic, but if I keep that to the side, whichever license you're working with, what capabilities are available through that, establish a governance which can help you protect and retain your information throughout its life cycle. Building on that, then the setting up the foundation with classification, enrichment, file plans, retention sensitivity classifications, also then helps us support the customers and also help organizations establish more centralized policies to prevent data loss, to prevent data exfiltration scenarios, and also by leveraging those capabilities, provide better responses to TSAR requests or subject right requests capabilities. So just trying to build this picture out before we get into the details to help you understand how different pieces within Microsoft 365 compliance are actually connected to each other and kind of help build us a full picture of an integrated compliance story for an organization. And then just finally, applying those controls to the information supported by a unified search experience, enables certain other audit and investigation capabilities such as litigation or e-discovery, leveraging Microsoft e-discovery capabilities, where we have classification available, the data loss prevention or the protection rules that are built in, the information that is collected through the audits help us provide a better response to those litigation or audit events. And then finally, sort of, once those building blocks are established, then you can yourself implement further capabilities which help you monitor certain, activities or engagements with the information based on the risk profile of the information or the risk profile of the user or the activity which is happening within the organization. So that's, in a nutshell, just a very quick overview of Infotechtion, our services, and how do we bring different pieces of Microsoft compliance or compliance in general and develop that and deliver that into a Microsoft ecosystem. So on with the new topic for today is the problem with the file shares. You might also refer to them as shared drives. Organizations also have personal drives or home drives. They are all different names for the same thing, which is information, unstructured information residing on network file shares on hosted servers. And people are accessing that information either by logging in through a VPN or a connected network and establishing the structure and that information through means of organizing folders and folder structures. And hence they are called shared drives or shared folders or file shares. So just wanted to quickly start with a high level problem statement. What is the issue with a file share? Some of the common things that we've heard from our customers and also from personal experience is that it's very hard to tell what is a record in a file share. Yes, there is information of value. Yes, people are using that information, but it is, and yes, as an individual, I might know this information is of value, but it's very difficult to categorize or classify information as a record, and not, even if not necessarily as a record, with some sense of classification to that information so that it can be interpreted either as a record or a sensitive information, etc. The other thing is that information is not protected as such on file shares. What I mean by that, it's very difficult to apply protection controls to information sitting on file shares, not natively for sure. And as you're moving more towards Microsoft 365, you're getting some of those native protection controls built into the platform. Having information in file shares and your records in file shares, especially as James said, the legacy platform or the pre-existing information that is still sitting on file shares, it's not creating any value, not for the organization, certainly for certain individuals, but overall, it's not creating any value, and it is sitting separately from where the work is happening right now, which is, for most organizations, I would imagine, is in the cloud, Microsoft 365. So the overall objective here is to kind of talk about and talk through is also your experiences and your concerns related to file shares. But really the overarching theme that we're hearing from organizations, from customers, and also partners is that the content which is sitting in share drives or file shares doesn't have a real solution available to manage information as records, to apply retention controls to it, lifecycle management, whether it is disposing the information through a review or an event, etc. It limits our ability to apply those controls. And beyond records management, there's no real capability to classify information and based on that classification or otherwise apply any preventative or protective controls to the information. So what's driving the file share cleanup? For most organizations, there are a number of drivers for organizations, but the three most popular is of course one being reducing the storage cost. It costs a lot of money to keep those file share storages, organizations who have invested in Microsoft 365 and have a storage quota available, whether in Microsoft 365 or Azure Cloud, want to leverage that, want to maximize that storage quota. But at the same time, the data sitting in file shares, could very quickly or easily eat up that available quota as well. So there is a sense that information that is sitting in file shares need to be migrated, reduce the costs on the file shares, but at the same time, do it sensibly, do it with a level of intelligence so that the organizations don't fill up their Microsoft 365 storage quota, because that also isn't unlimited. Of course, 365 cloud migration is one of the biggest drivers, especially we've seen during the pandemic, the need to support overall hybrid work or remote work, especially for file shares. Several organizations had VPN setups, and that wasn't the optimal way to connect to enterprise information. So that clearly is one driver to move towards the file share cleanup before migration. And also the big driver is the compliance risk mitigation. So especially, talk a lot about GDPR. It's a very regularly used phrase, but there are privacy compliance, legal and regulatory compliance requirements, and it is very difficult in file shares to manage those compared to what we are seeing, the newer technologies which have evolved, especially in Microsoft Cloud, with the ability to classify information, apply retention controls, whether it is retention labels or retention policies. There is a level of retention management available. Even if you are an E3 customer, you have now an ability to apply retention policies to the information, whereas in file shares, you don't have that functionality unless you buy a third-party software. So is Microsoft 365 a replacement for file shares? To a large extent, yes, but not for everything. So I've tried to divide this into sort of two categories. From a content point of view, what we look at is Microsoft 365, where things work well are capturing, documents, files, where you need collaboration, where you need to modify documents, need to manage versions, apply retention, protection controls, etc., and also manage privacy content effectively through methods of record management or disposing information that you don't need. Now, while Microsoft 365 or SharePoint Online supports wide range of file types, in fact, Microsoft's statement is that there are no known file types which are not supported. We know that there are certain file types which are not really suitable for SharePoint. So Azure Files is another place that you should consider as part of your strategy for cleaning up file shares or replacing file shares with alternate technologies. And in this context, we are talking about Microsoft, of course. So things like where you have backup files and folders, websites, applications, databases, and also information that you're going to keep for long-term preservation. We are seeing that Azure is the more likely place and the more suitable place for keeping those informations, simply because if you are keeping databases in SharePoint, it's not going to be of much use. When you have to use it, you will need to download it somewhere. And if you download it, you then create the problem of local copies. With Azure Files, you do get the benefit of accessing these applications or these file types, such as databases, in the way that they need to be used through another application, through another interface, or even as a folder URL path. But at the same time, because it's in the cloud, you are actually investing into that unified data protection and governance vision from Microsoft that is extending both across Microsoft 365 and Azure. And we can talk about that separately on the recent changes from the Microsoft purview. But for example, information managed in Azure can now be better controlled with basic lifecycle management policies, not records management, basic lifecycle management policies. You can apply information protection controls, for example, to identify confidential or highly sensitive content and apply encryption to that while it is managed in Azure Files. So in terms of sort of clean up and move, one of the themes that we have included in here is that there are sort of two ways to do this file share migration or replacement. The first is you clean and then you move, which requires a certain number of steps. You always take a system inventory to know where you are, what the coordinates are. Invest with your business to review that system inventory and clean up the data, and work with the business to classify that data, and then invest in a phased migration to move it to, let's say, SharePoint Online or Teams or somewhere else, whatever your choice of target platform is, and then apply some level of classification, some level of governance to that information. And the challenge we find there is the time and the effort required from the subject matter experts, the business users, to look at the information and tell whether this information is of value or not. The other challenge we find is that it's a long wait, often, depending on the volume that you are looking to clean up from your file shares and actually migrate over, to actually realize the benefit of having that information cleaned up, classified, and structured into the target platform. And in some situations, these could be several months. Some customers that we've worked with previously have about 70 terabyte plus data, and that could take about 8 to 12 months using some of these approaches. The other option is you just move it and then clean it afterwards, which means all the information is in the cloud. You get that basic protection and being in the cloud and accessing all information from one platform, and leave the business classification, the business review, and application of the governance to later on in the system. And the challenge we see with that is that most of the times governance, compliance, classification is kind of just sort of forgotten, because the IT projects, when they have migrated the information, they move on, and that all essential and all important step of classifying the information, applying the metadata, applying retention policies, etc., don't often happen. So you do get the information into the cloud quickly, but the quality of that information is often in question, and who owns the responsibility as well. So those are the kind of two approaches and challenges. And what we have been looking at, working with our customers and also with Microsoft and internally within our organization, is to kind of see how do we find that balance between quickly realizing the value of the information which is sitting in file shares, but at the same time not pass on the problem to later stages. So can AI help us in reducing that time and reducing that burden that you see on the clean and move approach, or in the move and clean approach, where you want to quickly move the information to cloud? Can AI help and reduce the burden on scenarios where you have decided to do the application of governance and classification afterwards, or even before that? So that's really where we're going to spend the rest of the time for today, and I'm going to be walking you through some of the benefits of AI, how AI is working right now. I'm also briefly going to talk about the work we have done as Infotechtion on the current AI capabilities and what solutions, accelerators that we have built, and leave you with some recommendations and guiding principles. But before I go any further, I just want to do a quick check. James, Per, any questions? I'm not keeping an eye on the chat.
That's fine. It's no questions. We have answered some of them already in the chat, so that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If any point, I don't know if anybody wants to come off mute and share their experience, just please feel free to post that in the chat. We'll get you onto the stage and say a few things. All right. So moving on, can AI solve the problem? And I just want to establish that this isn't a migration problem that we're discussing here. We know very well migration is kind of to some extent sorted. There are several migration tools available which can help you move information from A to B. So we are not trying to solve that problem, because that to some extent has an answer already in the market. The problem that we are trying to solve is, what is it that we are moving? And what are the approaches that we can leverage to really focus the efforts of our subject matter experts within the businesses to identify and help and guide this process, rather than sitting through files and folders and review that to determine whether this is the information that they would want to keep or delete it. So the purpose of classification, first of all, is important to understand. This is no surprise to you. You are all information management, information governance professionals. So I know that I'm preaching to the converted. But just to sort of set the context before we go into the details is, the classification, especially the modern classification approaches, which are metadata based, mostly, and also structuring your information, compared to how we have been classifying our information in file shares, which is predominantly folder based and limited metadata using the file properties. And so moving into these modern platforms, we have this opportunity to be able to classify information so that we can improve the search. We can identify the information in context of its value, in context of its purpose. And we can also leverage that classification to be able to feed and establish key metrics, KPIs, and general reporting, which are important and required in order to regularly assess and manage the information management or information governance maturity across the organization. And I know that there are several of those maturity standard models available, and organizations quite often rank themselves against those or benchmark themselves against those maturity models. And I believe that classification and the ability to apply a good enough classification to information does go a long way in regards to establishing or recognizing yourself as a mature organization from an information management and governance point of view. Now, that classification is also a challenge. We've seen for several years that we have built in lots of metadata columns, mandatory fields, and asking people to populate them. And we don't get the desired results unless it's a very structured process. And so we've moved on from there to now the new approaches which are developed or being developed in this space are, let's try and set more defaults as much as possible. Let's control the site creation process. Let's control the team's creation process and apply as much metadata as default so that we have some sense of structure in the environment. And where we want to actually spend more time on is expand that. Yes, applying default metadata at the time of creating those structures, those workspaces is important. But what about the information which is already structured in file shares? When we have to move that information along, we wouldn't be able to effectively leverage those defaults because we haven't created that information in context of those structures and in context of those default values. So that's where AI comes in, and the AI-based classification approaches come in to see whether we can improve on our current ability to classify information. So it's all about knowing your information. So the better we know our information, the better decisions that we can make, whether it is to keep information, dispose information, or archive information. So what is AI-based classification? Just a very high level, try to sort of think about how do I explain that in a 90-minute call. So you see here is a blob of text, which has a lot of words in it, has a lot of things that a subject matter expert, when they look at it, they probably will make something out of it. But for everybody else, it's just a piece of text. And where AI helps us extract some meaningful classification out of it is to read the content of the file and based on the content of the file, the patterns available in the file, try and extract certain information and actually put that into clusters or the groups of categories that it can find similar information. For example, in this case, you have a text. The AI can predict that the text is 100% in English, the language. It's extracting some key phrases which are known noticeable words based on the kind of data it has been trained previously, and based on the construct of the sentence which is used within this paragraph is able to also determine a high level the sentiment that is being used within that particular document. But more importantly, it's able to extract from this paragraph some key words, also known as key entities, and be able to recognize them as the type of entities or the type of information it brings. So for example, on the right-hand side, when you see named entities, it has steakhouse, which looks like a location. It has abbreviated location NYC, which from its references, it is a location. And it has some sense of information types. For example, there are people referenced within this document, and there are potentially some products referenced and certain phone numbers and emails referenced. So both based on that data map that it has created, out of that text, it is then able to map it to certain specific types of classifications. And that's exactly what we are interested in, is when those classifications are extracted. Then, for example, from a privacy point of view, we could highlight that this document includes some privacy content, some personally identifiable information which exists within this document. And it includes some product specific information. And if you have an information classification or retention classification matching certain types, then we would be able to, leveraging this AI extraction of entities, be able to map it to a product specification or a product review. Or, for example, in certain cases, we look at it later on, invoices, contracts, etc. So why we are classifying? Some people just assume that because they have the ability to search information across the enterprise, they don't need to index the information. Now, the key part of the example that I showed you previously was indexing. That information needed to be indexed. And as part of the indexing, the AI was then able to perform certain operations and extract certain entities which could be translated based on the rules that we can develop, either into records management classifications or confidentiality classifications, or just general business classifications as metadata when we move into SharePoint or other repositories. But indexing is important. So when it comes to, for example, things like images or imaging, there's sort of two problems within this notion. The first problem is that the images don't always contain text that you can search. So one of the things that you might say is that, yes, it's a Word document. I could have run those keyword searches and I could have found those documents. But that works for text-based documents. Where we need to deal with images, the problem is slightly different. File shares don't index images. There is no OCR capacity in there. So with the AI technology, the first key and important activity is to index that content within your platform, within your environment, and be able to OCR images, etc., to be able to identify some matching patterns within those images as well. So not only just a text-based analysis, but also an image-based analysis. The second reason is that searching isn't managing images, nor is searching the same as managing electronic files. So in addition to finding documents through this approach of classification, the approach also allows you to link individual records together. So the clustering mechanism that I talked about with AI, we can start to look at. Now, again, this isn't 100% accurate. This is going to result into false positives, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later on. But it does provide the ability to link individual records together, identify certain consistency across related documents, which we wouldn't otherwise be able to spot just by looking at the names of the documents. And also retrieve the information from like different perspective. Example, finding everything related to a particular vendor in a date range. Now, first of all, we need to identify if these documents belong to a particular vendor. And while we have the date properties available in the files, AI can help us identify which documents are vendor-specific documents. As I showed you previously in the example, the organization entities, if I go back briefly, the names, person type, or an organization entity. Those are some of the well-proven capabilities in the AI which are available now as part of the Microsoft stack, where it predicts with a very good level of confidence if it finds certain known entities within the document, and especially related to identifying vendors, organizations in general, and information related to organizations. Just a quick sort of business value case for AI classification before we move any further. There are several. As James said previously at the beginning, that we do see that we are moving towards that space where even if it is an AI, there is a need, there is a business case for automation, ability to extract classification for information through basic automations, even if it isn't AI, goes a long way in providing the business case and either showcasing that as a cost savings or productivity improvement, or loss of data loss, the reduced data loss and reduced risks from a legal and compliance point of view. But one of the things I've kind of seen is that relying on SMEs or people in context of file share to organize the information and make decision across all information has some challenges. Of course, the time and effort, but people also don't remember what they have. If you ask somebody what a record is, they may not be able to tell you if that file is a record or not, but they can tell you what type of information it is. And so the ability to predict what type of an information it is, get that validation from that user or subject matter expert, and then behind the scenes, using your retention classification and policies, apply those retention rules, is a much effective way to clean your file shares and classify your information than asking users, please go and classify the information, and make sure you read the information and make sure you apply retention label to it, or in some way identify that this is a record. We often also find is that the subject matter experts within the organizations who are able to support these activities are also quite expensive, less available staff. So the question and the burden is always on to make effective use of their time. So somewhat this AI classification is also going there to make sure that bulk of the work that they would do otherwise can be done in advance as the preparation, and the time that is required of them is very much towards verification, validation, and training the system to improve its accuracy, rather than sifting through all the files and folders to classify it. So there's a couple of other examples where is auto-classification effective. Overall, content, of course, text-based, where there is words, phrases, topics, similarity which are used. Formats, templates, see one on the right-hand side, an invoice template, where documents and formats follow a specific structure. We do see that AI has a good level of confidence in predicting the outcome. Images, languages, um, the improvements in the ability to support the language through AI classification and prediction model has significantly improved. Now a wide variety of languages supported. I'm going to show you a case study that we did with a Norwegian customer, and the quality of the AI classification that we received on Norwegian content or Norwegian language content was quite promising to us. And of course, metadata, acronyms, age, relevance, etc. Those are all confident areas for AI to start predicting and start classifying the information. Overall, from an AI point of view, it's looking at topic, similarity, sentiment, and ownership. One of the challenges we find with file shares or shared drives is that the information is structured in a way that you can identify clearly which part of a file share is owned by which part of an organization or business. And through AI, by leveraging some of the capabilities of people identification, organization identification, it helps us and provides us insights into the ability to predict or at least propose the organizational context, which can be reviewed and confirmed. So some common examples for you. I'm going to pick one or two in the interest of time. If I look at number 2, AI would read this example as if it contains a valid contract number somewhere near a contract number, and it isn't in a sample folder, then classify it as a contract. So these are some of the rules that can be built on the entities which are extracting. So AI isn't doing that decision making. AI is only extracting certain entities, and based on those entities, these common scenarios, these focus scenarios can be built in order to identify information and kind of reduce some of those false positives. Another example I'll just quickly pick is number 4, is if the AI is telling us that a file contains 16-digit credit card number, but the file type is a DLL, then we could build a rule that this is less likely to have a credit card number into a .dll file, and hence in that case do not classify it, and do not apply either record or confidentiality classification controls to it, or apply it accordingly. So just quickly, what are the innovation opportunities here? Based on the pilots and the review that we have done with AI and implementations in some places, that AI can be leveraged to automatically cluster documents with similarities. And where we are seeing the advantage of this is that often previously when we would do file share or legacy migration projects where there wasn't any classification available, and we were trialing AI, we would ask customers, what are your good examples? What are your good samples? Can you please give us those? What are your keywords? Can you please give us those? And based on that, we will build a dictionary and then we will run. And often we would find it difficult, or organizations would find it difficult to get started because they are missing those keywords. They don't have those keywords right now. They don't have that classification. With this approach of AI and AI's ability to extract known entities and cluster information, and based on those clusters, throw out the top keywords it is able to identify, provides us the ability to review those with subject matter experts and build that dictionary which didn't exist previously. Also, models pre-trained on a data set can provide reusability. So we are increasingly working towards the ability to create reusable models. You will see that with Microsoft 365. If you are using E5 or the add-on capabilities, you will see trainable classifiers. Microsoft is also investing in that space where they're providing pre-trained models, models which are trained and created for classifying information of a specific type, invoice, contract, etc., and available for you to use readily in your system, and review the outcome of that in a simulation mode to judge the accuracy of that classifier. So there is a greater reusability as well, that the more we create these models, the more we actually train them on wide variety of data sets, the better they will get. And also use AI not only to in future, because there are still several concerns about the privacy security aspects of how AI is used, integrated within the platform. But I do see that in future, we would want to leverage AI and trainable classifiers and some of the native capabilities within the platform to be able to predict the classification of information which is newly created in these target platforms. A good example of that actually is being used now quite prolifically across many organizations, is the ability to predict the confidentiality of a file based on its content and propose a recommendation to a user in real time through which they can decide whether this file should be an official classification, official sensitive, or some other secret classification that is established by the organization.
We have some questions, Vivek. One is that do we scan binary files as well as document, as you mentioned DLL?
We do scan. So there's a list of file types we do scan, so not just the text files, but yes, yeah, there are specific file extensions that we do scan and can be indexed.
And also a question related to Azure Files. We touched upon Azure Files earlier on. It's really expensive compared to blob storage. Do we believe that pricing for Azure Files would remain high, or is it projected to become more affordable over time?
That's a question for Microsoft. I wouldn't predict on that. But yes, I mean I used Azure Files, of course, Azure Blob Storage. AI works on both. So if you're finding that for your purpose, Azure Blob Storage is the cheaper option, then AI can absolutely run on Azure Blob Storage. And all of those use cases and all of those capabilities I just mentioned, they are all very valid for blob storage as well. And in fact, it is better if you have information already in Azure Blob Storage.
Are these AI tools available with Microsoft Purview itself?
I'm going to come to that actually on the next slide.
Excellent.
So good question.
Good question, Gary.
So what's available in the Microsoft Cloud? So what you see on the left-hand side is all the AI capabilities and all the different AI features which are available as part of the Microsoft Purview. Now, different licenses, we can go into that as a follow-up for sure. I can share the licensing details with you. But these are the capabilities which are available. And the one which is where we are seeing an increasing trend is the trainable classifier. In last 3 months, we've seen an increased focus across 4 or 5 different regions in regards to looking into the trainable classifiers and using trainable classifiers, especially to fulfill the use case of classifying pre-existing or existing data files within SharePoint Online, within Teams, within Exchange Online, because organizations just don't want their users to go back and start classifying information which already is existing. So that's a good opportunity there to use trainable classifier. Again, I would mention that there is a Microsoft funded workshop, which you can nominate yourself to. I will give you the details in the call to action, and it's It's like a 3-week workshop, but happens over sort of, engagement is over 3 days, where you get to trial all of these features on the left-hand side over a 90-day license. And you can, in a simulation mode, see the trainable classifiers in action, to review the accuracy of those classifiers, and to discover your content and to create a data map of your information. Microsoft has right now 17 classifiers like finance, invoice, etc., available, pre-trained, ready to use. And through this workshop, you get access to, also through the trial, there's about 30 new classifiers which Microsoft has developed, which are being trialed, and we are testing them with some customers. You get access to those additional 30 classifiers as well in a preview mode, so that you get a better coverage of your information. The second product within Microsoft Purview, where we are seeing more traction, is Syntax. And Syntax is really aimed at very specific scenarios where you have certain processes through which you have certain SharePoint sites or team sites established, and you want to build localized models in those sites and provide your business the ability to create those models to be able to auto-classify information. And Syntax, again, also works very well integrated with sensitivity labels, retention labels, that based on the extracted classification, you can apply retention and sensitivity labels. Now, with the Syntax license, it's a complicated subject, so I'll probably leave it for now, but just mention it very, very quickly, that from a licensing point of view, there are some advantages of using Syntax license, because it does allow you to auto-apply retention labels included in that license, and you don't have to go for a different license. But if you have any questions on that, I can share the details with you afterwards. But I just wanted to quickly mention that. But in addition to that, there are further AI capabilities available. So on the left-hand side, what you see is the content, is the AI capabilities and the tool sets to manage the content and classify the content which is already existing in your Microsoft 365. So that's the use case for the bits on the left-hand side. For the right-hand side is where the Azure AI comes into place, where we have built a solution on top to help you analyze information which is not yet in Microsoft 365, and you want to manage that information with classification, either in Microsoft 365 or in Azure Blob Storage or file shares, or on other cloud platforms. So, so the arrows basically are showing here that the AI capabilities in Microsoft 365 are also powered by the AI capabilities in Azure. So they are all sitting on top of the Azure AI capabilities. Microsoft has built specific modules in Microsoft 365, which are behind the scenes leveraging all the goodness that Azure AI provides. And we've kind of done the same thing, is build our solution as well on top of that same Azure AI platform, to extend the goodness of Azure AI to information which is managed outside of Microsoft 365. Our focus area is the intent to help our customers bring that information into Microsoft 365 or Azure Cloud. We are not building this solution or this approach to keep information in file shares, because there are other challenges because of which we believe that managing information in this manner in Microsoft Cloud in an integrated manner is the best way to go about, where you can maximize your existing investments in AI in Microsoft 365. So our intent is not to build these connectors or build these AI solutions to give you a hybrid infrastructure. We absolutely support the vision for moving information into the cloud and having that on an integrated platform. Okay, so just quickly moving on to a little bit about Infotechtion classification. I promise I'll keep it that to under 10 minutes, and then move on to the last part of this session to talk more about guiding principles, etc. Something for you to start thinking about building your own strategies, if you are thinking about it. So I want to start quickly with some principles that we kind of follow, and our solution is kind of based on is, information, for example, is a valued asset. Information is fit for its purpose, and for example, information is protected based on its privacy and sensitivity. So overall, we've kind of come up with these 6-7 information management principles, which are based on standard guidelines and standard best practices or recommended practices for managing, governing your information. And on that basis, we have created this tool, really with a focus to help customers clean up their file shares and move it into a target platform. So overall, from the left-hand side, I'll start to build up the picture. As there was a question previously, what type of file types we support: unstructured, semi-structured, and also legacy ECM, EDRM systems, which tend to be sort of more structured systems. As part of the solution, we index that data into Azure so that we can leverage the Azure AI and cognitive services capabilities. Now, these could be synced into Azure Files or Azure Blob Storage. The solution then creates a pipeline for all of those synced data into Azure Files to create a cognitive index. So this is the very important step where the system isn't just doing an inventory of all your files, folders, permissions, etc., but also is doing a full text indexing of your data. And there you have options that you can enable OCR, index PDF files, very similar to how you are able to do that within Microsoft 365. It's all based on the same principles, leveraging the same infrastructure as provided by Microsoft in M365. So at the same time, we also schedule sync events, because we know that while this cleanup is happening, you're not setting these file shares to read only. People are still working with that information. We want to minimize the impact to the end users who are still using these file shares. And as part of the sync and indexing, we are able to automatically, unattended, extract the entities. Now, important part of this is to know that this is all happening within your Microsoft 365, your Azure platform. There isn't anything or any data which goes out of your environment or your subscription. And then we move into the next stage, where based on that indexed content, so at no given point, we open the files from the file shares. The content is indexed, and as part of the indexed content, what is actually indexed is those entities that I showed you in the previous example, which are extracted by the AI rules that have been built. So you wouldn't see a copy of a file or a copy of an invoice sitting in the cognitive index. You will see the key entities extracted. And based on those, we have some pre-built models that we have already built for customers who were part of the early adopter pilot ring and still continue to be in that phase. And there is also an ability to build custom trainable models, very similar to how you are able to do that in Microsoft 365 by feeding in some example documents to the models, and they will extract the entity, extract the keywords, and based on that, provide you with the top keywords that are appearing based on the clustering, and then you can decide for that trainable model what type of information classification you would want to associate it with. And then as part of the solution, you also get a visualization, which is all built on Power BI or Excel spreadsheets, and also provides an Azure search through Power BI so that you can search for other entities and other keywords. And that's where we really focus on reducing that business effort, where the business SMEs come in to perform spot checks and review the outcomes rather than navigate through the folder structures. And then rest of the steps are standard. These are your processes, migration approaches, etc. Of course, we do provide services to migrate information, but these are well-trodden paths. You have migrated information. There are migration vendors, migration suppliers available, including us. But the important step is that once we have enriched and classified the information, we are able to feed that into the migration backlog. That data map that we create is able to feed into the migration backlog and provides you the ability to connect that data map to your information architecture in the target platform. And those are some of the decision points that you will need to make, that how do you map that data map to which sites, which teams, which libraries, etc. in the target platform. And as part of that migration, the general practice is to migrate the information and then validate it. That's where your business users come in, and there is some analytics available for people to verify that the source and target is matching. They're able to perform searches as they were previously, and supported by a technical validation of the information. But as I said, the migrate and validate, those are not the focus areas for us. The focus area for us is to sync and index, enrich and classify, let you validate it, and then provides you a data map that you can start to migrate into your target platform. From a user experience point of view, just a couple of screenshots that I thought would be useful for you to sort of just get a perspective on what do you see. You automatically get filters on deduplication, empty files, backup and logs, application files, which are already extracted. The system automatically categorizes file by different categories, by different classifications, by types, etc. You can select your file share structure in a tree view format, and you can select a particular node, and you can see the AI outcomes for that particular node as well. In addition to that, it also, this is an example of the personal data entities which have been extracted. And based on the rules, there are certain rules that we have built into the system, but can be configured on discussions with you. We come and discuss it with you. It starts to categorize information which is personally identifiable data into risk categories, high, medium, low risk, and what would be the actions related to that. And so the focus here for us is to identify, things like expired personal data based on the rules, because the system is telling us it has personal data in it. But should we be keeping that personal data, managing it and protecting it well, or should we be deleting it? Those are the rules that then work on top of the extraction. Just very quickly, this is just a quick example of extracting classifications, and based on that extraction, automatically mapping it to record classifications. So based on certain types of entities extracted from a document or a file, based on the rules and your retention classification, it can be mapped onto a particular retention classification category, retention label, etc. Which of course the benefit is that when you migrate it, you can map it to auto classification policies or retention labels, or even apply retention labels manually, or whichever way is part of your licensing and your retention management approach. The other thing you also get to see is actually a snippet of the content. So where your business SMEs are performing a spot check, they don't have to open the file and view the file. They can if they want to, but there is also a content snippet available that they can view in a preview mode very quickly, highlighting the keywords or specific patterns based on which the system has predicted this classification. And then finally, a sort of an experience whereby the users can actually perform spot checks and accept or reject. And if they reject, if they provide certain comments or provide a new classification, then that's the opportunity for the AI to take that feedback, train the model, and come up with new classifications.
We got a question, Vivek.
Okay.
The old AAP scanner, is that a still a viable option for scanning on-premise data? Or do our AI tool offer any kind of integration with the scanner to process on-premise documentation?
Yeah, we do provide. Actually, that's a really good question. So some of the PII scanning that we're doing is actually based on either the use of cognitive services PII templates, or where the data needs to be scanned in file shares, and we leverage the AIP scanner. It's very, very much in use, AIP scanner.
Good.
Just a listing of the pre-trained classifiers which are available. I won't spend too much time on it, but you can start to see that the more we classify, the more models we create, the more classifications we are able to create out of this, and more pre-trained models are available. So for example, when we go to another customer, we don't have to create a new model for identifying a patent, because we have already trained our classifier on a wide variety of patent documents, publicly available, customer specific. What we take out of that is a trained model, not the data, not the content. So that's a very important thing to remember, that the AI and the models are not storing the content. They're only storing the logic and the training which is provided to them. Just a quick case study. We finished that recently on about 70 terabyte of pilot that we did with a customer. It took us total of about 57 days not to migrate. This is only for classification, enriching, and closing the decisions on the final classification of the information. And our focus was really to reduce the business effort. So that 70 terabyte of data, we reviewed that over 35 working days after the classification, and over 7 cycles. And for each cycle, there was roughly about 1.5 to 2 day effort, which reduced after a few cycles, because the SMEs who were reviewing the content, they were gaining the confidence with the accuracy at which the system was predicting the classifications. So that's just a quick example for your reference. Is some other things in numbers. So over that 70 terabyte, 15% was straight away duplicate logs, backups. We didn't even ask anybody to remove them, review them. 10% were application files or saved program files which are obsolete. 25% content was not modified in 10 years, and the customer requirement was, if it is not modified in 10 years, and if it meets certain classification categories, then archive that into an Azure blob storage or other location. And there was 50% of the content, so roughly about 35 terabyte of the content, which was identified as qualified for migration with enrichments, and that will be migrated over by the customer team or their vendor to bring that into Microsoft 365 with those classifications, apply metadata, retention, and sensitivity classification. So a quick call to action for everyone here. As I said, 3 things you can do. If you are looking at file shares or file share migration and are not sure how how do you want to start with your classification. I've seen that retention classification is always a good place to start if you don't have a classification. You can join the 2 early adopter programs if you are interested. We do have an early adopter program with our solution, which we are running right now. You can nominate and you can email Pat on that. You can also nominate yourself for a Microsoft funded data discovery workshop, which is fully funded by Microsoft if you are a qualified customer, and Per can afterwards give you the details of it. And as part of that, you don't get this solution, AI solution, but what you do get is the Microsoft 365 and a trial with Microsoft 365 trainable classifiers, sensitive information types, and other AI products that can help you discover your sensitive data. And even if you are not willing to use E5 and other capabilities, that activity helps you build a data map of where your information is. So that's something which I can share with you. All of these are available in Azure Marketplace as well as Service Office. So you can have a look at that there as well, or you can email Per.
One question related to cost of joining the early adopter program. Is there a cost?
Yes, this is so for the Infotechtion early adopter program. Yes, there is a cost to it. We can share that cost with you separately. There is a cost to Microsoft funded as well, but it is paid for by Microsoft. The overall cost is, I think, is about £5,000, between £5,000 to £7,000 for both the Microsoft funded and the AI. It's just that the Microsoft funded we are able to offer you for free because Microsoft is backing it. Okay, so in the final 15 minutes, I think, I'll try and wrap this one up quickly. The final section is build your own strategy before you start this journey of file share cleanup and identification of records and important information in your file shares for migration. The couple of things that you would want to do is, first, as I said, identify what type of information you want to classify, because AI can throw a lot of things at you. And if you do not have a classification model or a classification taxonomy, it could be quite overwhelming. You can leverage pre-built models. I would say start with, if you have more than 25% of your organization already on Microsoft 365, I would highly recommend trialing the Microsoft pre-built models. That will give you a good level of experience. And if you nominate yourself for these Microsoft workshops, then a guided experience of using these classifiers, pre-built classifiers, which can pretty much automatically identify information and predict to you. And the effort required from you is to sort of review the accuracy and actually train it. So I would say that really is a good way to get started on your AI or auto classification journey. And then as part of that, there is effort required. AI isn't effortless. And it isn't just a flick of a switch. So there are iterations required as part of training the model. Even if these are pre-built models, they require training, and quite often they are not accurate and throw all sorts of data, which can be quite disappointing. For example, resumes, pre-built classifier, one would have thought it'd be very easy to predict resumes, but we found that with the AI classifiers, it was throwing all sorts of wrong information which had no connection to being a resume. And so I think those are the type of engagements where we have the opportunity to provide the feedback directly to Microsoft as well, where you're using trainable classifiers within the Microsoft product. And Microsoft is very keen to take that feedback, look at the customer feedback, the type of documents the classifier is predicting, and actually correct it, not specifically for you, but take that on as a product backlog roadmap item. But overall, as part of this classification journey, once you have your retention classification established, you can quite easily start to realize that in a simulation mode and work through various iterations to start enriching your content without impacting your end users in a simulation mode before you decide that this is the tool for you or what is your right approach in order to start actually labeling those files. Balancing the granularity is very important. So how do you want to apply the outcomes of the classifications at a team level, work group level, or an organization level? Provides different levels of accuracy and different levels of speed at which you can identify and classify the content. So um, that's an important aspect, and that's where certain tools and certain scenarios are more suitable for classifiers at an organization level across SharePoint sites versus classifiers which are very focused to specific sites, let's say HR or finance, etc. There are false positives, and they are quite frustrating as well. And one of the downsides of AI is that it could throw up all sorts of false positives, and people can start to lose confidence quite quickly with the technology. And so I always recommend that you do this together with somebody who has done it before. Um, I've heard several situations where people have just switched on trainable classifiers in Microsoft 365, and even for the sensitive information types, and they are not providing the right analysis, the right enrichment and classification, and people quickly switch off from those. So be mindful of the false positives. Absolutely expect false positives to exist and come up during this process. Protection of sensitive data is quite important, and a key use case, as I've seen on this journey to leverage AI for classification. The most important thing people are looking for is actually to, a lot of the times, show me my records and show me my sensitive information that I need to protect, and I'm not protecting because it's sitting in a file share with open access to everyone. So protecting sensitive data, even though you're looking at it from a records management point of view, could be a blind spot for a record management lens. And hence I'm bringing this on this slide to make sure that you appreciate it, that records management and identifying sensitive data and protecting sensitive data related classifications are two key outcomes of this, and we must use this opportunity to achieve both outcomes instead of doing the classification to just identify records and then embark on another journey to identify sensitive information. We talked about your retention classification, but your taxonomy is also very important. The taxonomy that you're going to use in the target platform, your classification is only as good as the taxonomy that you build in the target platform. So retention classification and your taxonomy in the target platform, it could be a very simple taxonomy. And some of the things that we've talked in the other roundtables underpin everything that we have talked about here. As I think Rob Bath has mentioned a couple of times, the importance of provisioning your sites and governing and controlling how you provision your sites, and what kind of metadata, what kind of structures and templates you associate with those. That's very important, because once the information is classified, the next question the migration team will ask you, where do I move it to? And you can't move all of that information into just one single site collection.
That's quite good, Vivek, because we've had a discussion in the chat related to does the EI actually swap out the how do we continue? Do we use AI to actually embed metadata and all that stuff into our information, or do we need to continue working with the organization to secure both the taxonomies, the metadata, content types, and so forth? And of course, one does not. So AI doesn't solve all your problems.
No, it doesn't, and you still need that architectural foundation.
Yes.
You know, basic content type, basic site structures, basic governance in terms of how you create those sites. Yes, the additional classifications which are extracted can very well be mapped to existing columns like retention labels, sensitivity labels, or added as a new columns to your content type automatically as part of the migration process. But you've got to have a basic content type to start with. Okay, I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to quickly move on. Couple of slides again emphasize on the importance of auto classification aligned with a good taxonomy, and a good taxonomy is also quite essential to identify, you know, the different levels of severity of your information, you know, the sensitivity of the information. So what's a low severity, what's a medium severity, and what's really critical, valuable, important for you. You know, that taxonomy is quite important. That's where AI and some of the models that we have built and approaches that we have built helps you establish those big rules and big definitions for what's low value versus what's critical value. But it does need a review to make sure that it aligns with your organization. So we can get you started with it. We can give you a template for those, but we still often need a review with the organization to make sure that, you know, that's balanced well. Quick one: files versus emails. I know we have this topic on, and maybe we'll do this as a follow-up to specifically look at auto classification in context of emails. One thing I just will say very, very quickly is that the Microsoft 365 trainable classifiers do support emails now. So previously they didn't. Now, not all of them support already. We can give you the list as a follow-up. But the pre-trained classifiers are now starting to support messages. So you can, whether your email message is in SharePoint, you've uploaded that as a file, or it exists in Exchange Online in a mailbox, you will be able to use trainable classifiers with some conditions in Exchange Online and classify your emails. But one of the things actually to differentiate is that emails are different from files. You know, files have formats, but different file formats like docx, xlsx, pdf, etc. In case of emails, they are all files. So the file type based analysis or inventory isn't very effective in context of emails because they all will come up as emails. Whereas what you do get with emails is a subject matter, a sender, a recipient, a domain. Those are really, really important factors that can give us really useful insights about that email or that particular piece of content and marry that with what the AI is telling us in terms of entities it has extracted from that unstructured part of the email. I'm going to skip this one because I'm just 5 minutes away. Overall, AI can help you classify, but if you have a complex retention classification, then AI isn't going to help you effectively applying that retention classification to information. So I would say that one of the things that you should look at is that if you feel that you have 100 plus retention categories, etc., then definitely do review your records retention schedule, because the more big buckets, the simpler version you have, the better application of the outcome of the AI can be applied. And especially when you have to work with event-based retention triggers, etc., it could still be quite tricky because AI isn't going to extract that trigger for you. That would still need to be an additional complexity, which is yet to be managed. Just a quick word on this. Start with easy wins and keep working until you feel that your effort that you're putting into AI or classification is now exceeding the business value that it is going to deliver. So that'd be kind of a good way to start. Find the retention category with short retention and broad definition. Things like apply longer retentions first before you start applying shorter retentions, for example. Classify overlap from low to high, just a very quick one. As I said, apply long retention before you apply short retention. Sometimes it is more effective to define what to get rid of and get rid of it before you start to classify information. So I always say that AI can definitely help, but the first part in the process to inventory and index the files is a very important step, because it can really quickly tell us, based on the existing rules that we have already prepared, which information you're not likely to use. As I said in the example of the customer case study, the backups, the log files, etc., they can easily be filtered out just on the basis of the first inventory to remove from your system. And then finally, test. We know that there is a challenge with testing AI when consultancies come and ask you for your data so that it can be brought into a test environment, and DPOs and record managers and info security teams have challenges around that. But that testing is important. And what we are doing to get around that situation is actually starting to create some content packs that where certain generic classifiers or classifiers which are sort of more available in a public domain, like resumes, patterns, etc., to build your confidence in the technology, we can use those and use these broad-based, anonymized content packs to actually perform that testing, to get you started on the journey, and then start analyzing the content in place rather than trying to move it out of the system into another system simply because we want to test it and prove it that the technology works. And then I'm going to skip this because I'm running out of time. Quickly, just 2 final guiding principles for you. We need to leverage the policies, communications, and subject matter experts and maximize the value that they provide and minimize the impact on them. And that's where the pre-work, the classification with AI can actually help us. We are not establishing AI to start making decisions at this stage. What we are establishing AI to do is to help us and help our subject matter experts make better decisions about the information. The second guiding principle, consistent approach and less accuracy. Go for that. And we try to avoid perfection. Good enough principle. AI is providing us a consistent classification rather than a high level of accuracy. And then finally, I'm finishing on time. Call to action if you want to read more about it. Some of you have been on our website. There's 100 plus blogs available on this particular topic of AI classification. There's ebooks that we have written about some of these topics, compliance frameworks. And if you're interested in nominating yourself for Microsoft funded or the early adopter pilot program, you can reach out to me. My email is here, or you can reach out to Per. His email was shared also in these slides. And last but not least, thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any final questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yes, I think we have some. Oh, Per has answered them already. Thank you very much, Vivek and Per, and everybody. Thank you so much for attending these sessions, and as part of the IM Tech promise to deliver some of these future future facing technology that we have. Sometimes AI is no longer considered future, Vivek, isn't it? It's already here. It's already here now. We have to, as information professionals, we believe that we have to start now in trying to understand it and how it applies to our day-to-day work as information professionals. And this is one of those that we hope will be able to help the community to start that step into this AI scenario. And we, through James Lappin, we would be wanting to put more of the future thoughts in technology knowledge shares that we have, where I'm sure Vivek and Per will be part of it as well for other future things that we have. Guys, do you have any final questions before I close the meeting? Just one thing. Everybody will get the link to the video recording of this session. The slides, I will upload it to the IM Tech site once when I get it from Vivek. And that's how we will make it available. But as I said, for the video, you'll get the link soon as I end this event. Yep, everybody's thankful, Vivek. That was brilliant. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank
Maria.
you.
Thank you, Vivek Per, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thank you. See you all. Bye.
Bye.